Welcome to the Full Arch Growth Show. I am so excited about this episode, not because it's the first published episode, but because Dr. Spencer Ross is wise beyond his years. He's just 33 years old. He bought an GP office in rural Maine during COVID. His hygienists have been there longer than he's been alive, but in 11 months of advertising Full Arch, he generated $633,000 on just $52,000 of ad spend. So for anyone counting, that's a 12x return, while still maintaining a full GP schedule every single day. In this conversation, he really breaks it down, kind of how he did it, how he blocked his schedule without losing his GP patients, how he managed that transition, how he got his team sort of bought in when they had done things the same way for over 35 years, how he positioned himself against specialists in his area, and what he'd do differently if he had to start over. Now, he says something really interesting about where the full arch space is heading that I think every doctor should hear, and it's not what most people are talking about. This one is for the GPs who are curious about advertising full arch, but they think they're too busy, they're too small of an office, or they're too far from a major metro to really make it work. Let's jump into it. Dr. Ross, let's just start a little bit with your background. You're obviously a young guy and you've built something really exceptional, which is why I wanted to bring you on and hear a little bit more about it. So tell me a little bit about your background and when you purchased the practice and how that kind of all went.
Yeah, sure. I graduated from the University of New England. So from the start, I definitely had a little bit more experience in the field of implantology than most first-year graduates would because we were a new school. I was the third class to graduate from the University of New England Dental School. Because of that, we had no postdoctoral programs. So there were no dental graduates that were going to be oral surgeons or periodontists or anything like that for any type of specialties. So we got to handle all of those cases. So I placed my first implant when I was a sophomore in dental school, which is pretty much unheard of. That's when most people are just starting to touch a handpiece, let alone place implants. So I definitely, gained a lot of experience there. When I graduated, I actually started working in public health, about an hour and a half north from where we live now, and I was on the coast. And to be honest, the field of implantology was kind of on a back burner because the patients I was seeing was, we were doing multiple extractions a day. Felt like a pediatric dentist as well because we were seeing a lot of kids. Being a nonprofit office, if they didn't get treatment with us, then they weren't getting treatment at all. So fast forward a year working there, I was seeing all of my patients. I was also teaching our fourth year dental students at the same time. So I'd be seeing their patients, seeing my patients, starting to honestly my first year get almost a little bit burnt out because of the sheer volume of patients that I was seeing. And then COVID happened. And so all offices got shut down. And that's when my opportunity to buy a practice turned up. And it was, like I said, about an hour and a half south on the coast from where we are now, or from where I was working then. And this doctor that was selling the practice, he owned a practice, and then his wife actually owned another dental practice in the area as well. And so my older brother's a dentist, and the two of us came in, and he bought her practice and I bought my practice. And we're about 15, 20 minutes away from each other. So in the same exact area. And so that's when, I got back into the field of implantology. Starting out at the office, I was obviously just doing restorations. The office that I had bought, he was referring all patients down to southern Maine, which is about an hour and a half, 2 hour drive for a lot of patients to have, extractions done or implants, and a lot of back and forth for those procedures. So that's when I really started taking more courses in the field of implantology. And I took what's called the Maxi course, which I think the statistic is like 1% of dentists have taken it. It's 300 credit hours. You end up going down to Boston for 5 days every month. So it was a pretty big commitment. I obviously can't see patients during those days that I'm down there. But that's where I developed the basis of everything that I, have gone forward with in the field. It was with Dr. Brian Jackson. He was actually the president of the American Implant Association at the time that he was teaching us. Awesome guy. Couldn't recommend learning from him anymore. So I took that course, and towards the end of it, I felt comfortable to start placing implants in my practice. And so I can still remember my first implant patient that I had placed out of school. Every time that I come in, she's blown away. she likes to keep up with the cases that I've been, doing, since the single implant that I placed on her. Gosh, it's probably 4 or 5 years ago now. And she's blown away by it, now that we've jumped into the full arch cases. So after I took that maxi course and, started placing implants, I got more involved in the field, and I've flown all over the country, from California, Arizona, Florida. I've taken a class we went to Portugal for a hands-on course, and I kind of just, yeah, like dove straight in.
Hmm.
And so now, like you alluded to, I'm a general dentist. I do fillings every day. I do crown and bridge. I do extractions. I have my hygiene checks that I need to do for my hygienist
Hmm.
every day. But now we are doing, a full arch case, once a week, at least a couple times a month. And, starting out, it was, patients in my practice that had been in the practice for a while, that I recognized needed a service like this, but they didn't want to travel down to Portland and do this, and there weren't really a whole lot of offices that were offering hybrid or full arch surgeries, and if they were, they got to go to a specialist and have implants placed, and then they
Hmm.
bounce back to their GP to get the restoration, and have to go back to their surgeon for checkups. And like I said, for my patients, that was traveling an hour and a half, 2 hours down to southern Maine.
Hmm.
So my first handful of cases that I did in the office were patients that had been at the office for years but didn't have this option available to them. And so in the meantime, all of these classes that I take with my older brother. So for lack of better word, he's a competing office in the area.
Yeah.
So I had noticed that he was definitely doing an influx of these full arch cases. And then I started having my staff come in and be like, you see your brother is advertising and doing this and doing that. So, I owe him a lot. Being my older brother, he's gotten me to take some of these classes and stuff and
Hmm.
jump out of my comfort zone.
Hmm.
But once I heard that he was advertising a little bit, I was like, all right, he's helped me enough with everything. Now I need to step out and figure out my own way to start advertising. And so after doing a little bit of research, that's when I ended up coming upon you guys.
Hmm.
And right after our first interview, I don't think I hesitated and was like, all right, let's get going.
Yeah, for sure.
So fast forward to now, and I don't have an exact count of our cases, but I just had Colson
I
send
actually
me.
brought that just in case we would need
Yeah.
it. It looks like, just kind of reading my notes, it looks like we've been together about 11 months. You
Yep.
spent about 52,000 and you've generated about 633,000, which
Yep.
represents about a 12x return on ad spend. When you see those numbers, like, what does that actually mean for your practice day to day? For folks that might be listening to this wondering, can I do this? Can I start advertising for full arch? What does it look like? Because a lot of people are really busy in their GP office. Can I
Yeah.
start doing that? What does that look like in your day to day? Those kind of numbers.
So there's certainly a lot more commitment when you're jumping in and doing that sheer volume in 11 months. That's on
Mm-hmm.
top of, like I said, I'm a general dentist.
Mm-hmm.
I have a lot of patients that I take care of, and obviously the majority is not full arch. So you need to kind of weigh different situations. I learned very quick off the bat that I needed to start blocking off half a day of schedules, which gets a little tough with being a general dentist. I have somebody come in and break a tooth, and I'm like, okay, you need a crown. I can see you in, 2 months or so. But then in the back of my brain, I'm like, oh, I have these slots that are blocked off for full arch. But
Mm-hmm.
that's a commitment because, these other patients that are coming in and their needs are, I don't want to say are more important or surpass, a broken tooth or something like that. But a lot of these patients have been searching for help for a while, especially in my area, and just don't really know about these options of full arch implants. And so, that's when, like I said, I certainly had to weigh the different situations, but I've found it very beneficial to block off, a half a day, once a
Mm-hmm.
week. And whether we're filling that with a hybrid case, or, I have certainly, like I said, several other patients, with broken teeth or something that we're
Mm-hmm.
able to bring in sooner and fill those slots within like a day or so.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely doable for, any GP, but like I said, there's a big commitment between the
Mm-hmm.
amount of reviewing cases, planning these cases, keeping up with on my end of updating things on you guys' website, the Implant Engine, which is an awesome resource and is very user friendly. But yeah, when I bought my office, that revenue that we've generated just by working with you guys, we were only doing a little bit better than that total.
Hmm.
So to be able to boost that amount of revenue is it's huge. I'm a young doctor still out of school. I mean, I've been out of school for 6 years now, but it's an expensive world that we live in, and investing in the equipment that we have to do these cases is substantial. But it's been totally worth it. When we finish up these cases and these patients get their final teeth, it's life changing. Most of them end up crying. I just had one that, once we got his teeth in there, he was, I think, mid 40s, and he hadn't had any teeth, no dentures or anything for 2 years. He was in deep depression. And the day after we did his surgery and got his teeth in there, he started a diet. He started eating healthy. He started working out. He looks like a completely different person.
Oh,
And that was just by putting teeth. You'd think that, once we got teeth in there, he might even put on some weight because he's got something to chew with and stuff. But he decided right from the get-go, he's bettering his life and started doing it all around. So it's pretty amazing what these cases do. It's cool, you can see in their pictures too, before pictures, and then it's not just a bigger smile, like their entire complexion changes.
they look 10 years younger. I mean,
Yeah,
sometimes
yeah,
15,
easily.
sometimes 20. I mean, it's unrecognizable that it's even the same person. And I think it's not just the smile, it's the energy change of the
Yeah,
individual. Their energy changes. And that's
exactly.
on their face, yeah, and in their body language.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's become an addiction, just by the sheer feeling of helping somebody like that. I got into the field because my dad's a dentist, and since like kindergarten I've wanted to be a dentist, and that was the same for my older brother. And it was just because we wanted to be like our dad. He was never one to be like, hey, you guys should be dentists, or follow me in this career path. But he just enjoyed what he did so much. And then us just wanted to be like dad turned into where we are now. So he's still practicing too in our rural hometown in Rumford, Maine. He doesn't do any of this implant stuff at all. So he's blown away by what we're doing.
Yeah, what does he think about it?
I think sometimes he's still in a little bit of awe and kind of shock that like we're doing these things, but
Uh-huh.
he obviously recognizes the amount of time. I mean, I fly out of or out of state. I mean, at least every other month, probably. Well, that was a couple of years ago. We took a little break this past year, and I've been focusing on bringing in cases and stuff and
Right.
sticking around. I think that my
Mhm.
education has been pretty thorough. But again, I'm flying out next month to take another course down in Miami. It's been great. You make a lot of connections at these classes, and I've trained with some of the top surgeons in the country, and these guys
Mhm.
are awesome resources to have. I'm blown away at the cases that they do. So it's a nice, like I said, resource to have. Any little case you have questions about, I'm able to bounce off from these guys, and it makes you feel a lot more comfortable the more you know, obviously.
Yeah, and I think there's an aspect, I like to go to conferences of other agency owners because I think there's an aspect of it's nice to know that you're not the only one struggling with this problem
Yeah,
and to be around people that have the same kind of ambitions and goals and desires and hopes and dreams and that they have the same passions as well is really
yeah.
nice.
Definitely, definitely. It's nice to connect with somebody on that level, and somebody that has a complete understanding of what you're going through, like you said. That's why, I talk to my older brother every single day after work. We do the same exact stuff in our offices. So dentistry is an awesome career, and I absolutely love it. It's my passion, but it takes a toll on you for
Yeah.
sure.
Mhm.
We're working in a small environment all day, every day. A half a millimeter is our limit, whether something is good or bad. That's like
Mhm.
a hair's width sometimes. Like,
Yeah.
so it definitely takes a toll on you, especially that's why I enjoy bouncing around and doing different things as a general dentist. It keeps things interesting. And like I said, these cases have just been extremely rewarding. We started out doing them on Fridays, and typically we're not open on Fridays. So it'd be me and my two assistants coming on an extra day during the week. And at first I felt like a little bad that I was having them come in for an extra day, but I soon learned that they enjoy doing these just as much as I do.
Hmm.
And then once we got into a rhythm with it, we're like, all right, let's just start putting these in the regular schedule. We can do a half day and we have no problem.
Yeah.
But that's, like I said, with quite a bit of an investment into the equipment that we needed so that we can, we give people teeth in a day.
Hmm.
Come in
Yeah.
a morning and leave in the afternoon with a full arch of teeth.
Hmm.
So it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, incredible. So you came into the office. It was GP office that you purchased, and you
Yep.
have shifted this office into having, pretty significant implant focus. What did
Yeah.
you need to do in terms of coaxing the team that was there, or did you hire a new team? You've talked about your assistants being as excited about this as you. Were they already in the office, or did you need to go out and find people that board with you?
No, the two assistants I have now were not with the office. I hired one of them actually, I think probably a month or 2 months after I bought the office, and it was for no reason about implants or anything. I still wasn't placing implants at that time. She's a rock. I rely on her for a lot, so it was very easy to train her in everything that we do.
Mhm.
I've bounced around with, geez, three or four different types of implant brands and stuff. So,
Mhm.
every implant has a different kit. And so then I'm like,
Yeah.
all right, Tammy, well, we're learning a new one now. And she's been wonderful with that. My newer assistant, I actually just hired this past August, and she was a dental assistant actually like 25 years ago, and she trained my assistant that I have now back then.
Oh
And then
wow.
she got out of the field to raise her kids and then got into teaching. And then has come full circle, and I hired her at the office. And so she had zero background in implantology at all. And so I've just kind of trained them.
Mhm.
So I mean, again, it's very doable. I'll add, and for no judgment at all. But they're not necessarily younger assistants. They're both in their early 50s, and they picked up on everything. No problem at all. I mean,
Mhm.
I do a full digital workflow for these cases too. So we're full arch scanning. I do photogrammetry with a micron mapper. They watch me do some of it, and I'm sure they're like, yeah, he's definitely the one that's going to handle that. And I'm not sure exactly what's going on, but they've picked up on everything, and I wouldn't be able to do what I've been doing without them. That's for sure.
Yeah. Did anything else have to change about kind of the structure of your practice when you decided to kind of push more into implants? Did you have a conversation with everyone, or did you just kind of say, "Hey, here's what we're doing," and did you have to identify a treatment coordinator? Like, how did that go for you?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we definitely had to change things a bit. My hygienists have been at my office for two of them have been there for, geez, 35 years. That I'm only 33 years old, so that's longer than I've been alive. So you know, they're connected with their patients. Some of them are some of their very good friends. They see them twice a year, and they catch up every. Sometimes we joke and we're like, "Geez, is there cleaning going on down there? Or are they just talking about life?" But
Yeah.
that's because of the connections they've built. When I started out, it was heavily relying on them feeling confident with me, and
Mhm.
talking to these patients. Somebody comes in with a broken tooth and they used to be referred to a specialist, and that specialist would
Mhm.
extract it and do the implant. Why is this younger? And most of my patients say, geez, are you out of high school? Or like,
Mhm.
why is this younger patient or this younger dentist going to be the one extracting my tooth, and he's going to do the implant too? Like, so yeah, I mean, it definitely took some. I didn't necessarily have to convince my team. They knew all the classes that I've been taking and everything, that I'm a well-rounded person. I wouldn't
Mhm.
jump into something if I didn't feel confident doing it, but I had to rely on them. I would obviously present things to a patient, but some of these patients, like I said, I've been seeing them for 30 years. And so in the end, I step out of the room, they're going to look at the hygienist and say, what about going back down to Portland? Like, so that definitely had to change a little bit, which honestly worked out really well. I don't think I really had any issues. There were a couple of patients that, they had like 3 implants with the specialist in Portland, and they felt comfortable with them. And I never would question or push anything about that,
Mhm.
because God forbid, it is a surgery in the end, and there's any type of complication that could arise. So if I'm sitting there trying to convince somebody to see me when they want to see the specialist, God forbid their implant fails, they're part of the 2% or something. I just didn't want that feeling or anything like that. But most of them
Mhm.
had no issues. I mean, they're like, "Oh, I don't gotta go to Portland. Are you serious?" Like, so yeah, it's worked out really well. I mean, I I joke with my older brother that I feel like most of my patients are like 65 plus. Like I have an older practice for sure. I'm like,
Yeah.
geez, do I have like that reputation? Like come see him. We have a lot of younger patients too, but so a lot of my patients don't like to travel like that, of course.
Mhm.
2 hour drive is a long drive. Plus we're in
Mhm.
Maine, and a lot of people really don't travel a whole lot. We're
Hmm.
comfortable in the beautiful place that we live, and don't feel the need to travel.
Hmm.
So I think the benefit of me not having a specialist in the area at all helped out
Hmm.
quite a bit.
Yeah.
Um, because that's obviously not the same for most people. We're in rural Maine, which is completely different than most of the cities and stuff where a lot of this full arch surgery is going on, which
Yeah.
I think is what's helped me out quite a bit too, not being in a city. I was born and raised in a rural area. I feel like a lot of these patients feel a little bit of a more of a connection with me when we're talking and stuff. A lot of it is connecting with your patient, to
Hmm.
seal some of these cases. You got to make them feel comfortable with the person that you are. This is a huge thing that they're investing. It's not just, whoever this is, 20, $40,000. This is what I'm going to do. See you later.
Hmm.
We try to connect with our patients. What are you doing for work? How are your kids doing? Simple questions that a lot of patients or a lot of docs, don't take the time to do. And that's what I
Hmm.
really enjoyed about when I did transition from that nonprofit office where I was just like nonstop on the go. Really enjoyed making connections with my patients, and that's
Yeah.
the beauty of being in a rural area and a private practice. Being your own boss.
Hmm.
Sometimes I have my assistants being, standing in the corner and being like, "Come on, you got somebody next door," but I'm
Yeah.
standing there talking with this patient about hunting or
Yeah.
where they're going this summer. But like I said, building those relationships and having those, small conversations with patients make them feel, important. They're the only ones sitting there in the room. You understand what they're going through. You've been through it with several other patients and what the end result can be for them.
Hmm.
Like I said, it becomes addicting almost.
Yeah. What has been the hardest part of this journey for you?
Making the time for these cases, being a solo GP. When I bought the office, we were booking out like 2.5, 3 weeks. Um, Last year, before I started advertising with you guys, I was probably booking out, 4 to 5 weeks. I've just gotten busy between some of the consults that I have turned into. I don't want to extract all your teeth. You definitely don't need this, but I'd love to have you become a new patient. So then that turns into obviously another appointment with them. Now, a year or 11 months after advertising with you guys, I'm booking out like 2.5, 3 months, which is tough sometimes. I work through every single lunch.
Hmm.
Luckily, my assistants are really good with that. They rotate with me. But coming from that nonprofit office, I never had time for lunch, so that's when I got in the routine of doing that.
Hmm.
And then when I started working with you guys, the only consult time that I could really allow was putting something in a lunchtime or putting something at the end of the day. So time management I think has been the hardest part for sure, because like you said, I'm a GP, but I've also turned this into a full arch practice.
Hmm.
I'm trying to do both worlds.
Yeah. You've mentioned a couple of things that I think are interesting. One, it's almost like there's obviously you're busy, so time management is very difficult, but there's this other aspect of it where you almost have to take a leap of faith and block your schedule, even though you know you could fill it with something because you know you can fill it with something more profitable. And I think that initial thought for some GPs is like, how do I make the time for this? Or should I
Yeah.
make the time for this? And should I take this risk in blocking my schedule for this thing that I don't have yet? It's one of the reasons why they struggle to start full arch marketing. Is that kind of what you were saying was a struggle for you, is just kind of blocking that time off for full arch? And how has that paid off for you?
Like I said, I mean, it was definitely, I didn't do it to start because I wasn't sure how this was going to go, and that's when I first started out, we were only Monday to Thursday. And so that's when I'd put cases on Fridays. Number one, because I was newer to it. I had done, before I started advertising with you guys, I mean, I had done a handful of cases and stuff, but I still just felt more comfortable doing them on a Friday. If there's any issues with anything else, I'm not worried about hygiene checks or anything like that. So that was easy starting out. But once I realized that this advertising really works, and I'm not going to be, we can do this in a 4-hour time slot or something. We don't need to come in on Fridays. That's when I started taking that leap and blocking off those days. And like I said, I'm an extremely busy GP, so even if I think it's only happened like once, even if we get to a day that was blocked off, and it's typically we know by the beginning of the week if I'm going to be doing a full arch case or something like that. If it's a Monday, we still have a Thursday blocked off.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty easy for me to fill that schedule. So I wasn't as worried about that aspect, but you're totally right. Taking an entire half a day and just putting a block there and being like, all right, yeah, I'm going to book something else there. It should work out. And then seeing, this emergency patient, and then another emergency patient and be like, yes, you need a crown. Like we'll do it
Mm-hmm.
in a month and a half, 2 months. It definitely gets a little stressful, but yes, I mean, the profitability of these cases is certainly, helps out quite a bit. But, most of these patients, like I said, are in a lot more of a need than somebody with just a broken tooth or something like that. If it was a true emergency and somebody's in pain or something like that, trust me, I'd bend over backwards and jump through hoops to get somebody in. I wouldn't be booking them out 2 months. But it's worked out in my office so far.
Yeah, you're making that decision of what needs to be done now and what can wait, and maybe that wouldn't be a
Yeah,
decision you would have made previously.
yeah, definitely.
So, just one kind of hypothetical question here. Where do you
Yeah.
think the industry is headed? You go to these conferences, you talk to, folks all over the industry. What is in 10 years, what does the full arch space look like? And what opportunities are there for people that maybe haven't started marketing yet?
The full arch space is getting very busy with a lot of GPs that are jumping into it. There's a guy that I've learned from a lot, Dr. Simon. He's an amazing surgeon, and he has this saying that he posts cases because all he does is revisions, cases that have failed. And his saying is from what's it called? Game of Thrones. Winter's coming,
Mm,
because there's a lot that are jumping into this field and not having the background, not taking the training, and
mhm,
just, going for it without the right background, without knowing, simple tips that just add up on top of each other. These cases fail. And they a lot of them are catastrophic because, to start, you're removing everybody's teeth, you're removing bone that's viable, and then you're placing implants in the only bone that's available. And then when those implants fail, where do you go next? So I think that the full arch space is going to turn into a lot of remote anchorage cases, which is what I've been doing a lot more of my training in. These patients that have, whether they have failed cases or they've just been missing their teeth for a really long time, you don't have that bone available that, for some of these slam dunk full arch cases you do. So, you're going to the pterygoid plates, I'm going to try not to jump into the field, but zygomatic implants and going up to the cheekbone. I think that the full arch space, unfortunately, is going to turn into a lot of revision cases.
mhm,
And
mhm,
that's just because there aren't a lot of limitations. You don't need to send in for your license additional to start doing these
mhm,
cases. So a lot of doctors look and see the profitability of them and then just start to try and bust these cases out. But like I said, without the right background, without the right training, you get yourself into some messy situations, and a lot don't really think about that. That's a human that you're working on. I think there's going to be a lot of good things to come from it in the future, but I think that a lot more revision cases are going to happen. So doctors that are looking to jump into it, I would definitely recommend to take a maxi course where you learn all about implantology, from start to finish, and then start building off from that. And
mhm,
take the advanced courses where it's remote anchorage. And the biggest thing is knowing complications. What are you going to do when you do this case and the patient comes in and they have XYZ? Like, you're going to refer to the specialist at that point. You just did this full arch case, but now you're going to send them to a specialist to manage your complication. So yeah, like I said, it's definitely doable for any GP that wants to make the commitment, but you have to commit. Like, you have to
mhm.
do that training, not only for you to help you sleep at night after you do some of these things, but for your patients, because
Yeah.
it's a huge investment for them. A lot of people are taking out loans, and that's a loan equal to buying a vehicle or a down payment on a house. And
Mhm,
if you mess that case up and they have to go back through it, and then they're kind of tapped on funds, and then they end up possibly stuck with like the worst denture of their life if they're not able to afford to have a revision done. So it's not a great outlook on what I see for some of the future of full arch implantology, but it's also kind of stressing, like, cross your T's and dot your I's before you jump into the field. Make sure that you feel fully comfortable with what you're doing, and then just, plan for the worst, because
Mhm.
it can happen, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Kind of just last few questions here, just kind of about your experience with us.
Yeah.
What has your experience been like working with the Implant Engine so far?
I think it's been great. Colson's been my go-to guy for everything. I texted him this morning. I was like, "Hey, I got my meeting with Chelsea. Can you send me all my numbers that I need?" And of course, he did immediately. And then, anything that I've needed to change with our platform, questions about patients, he's gone back to me within minutes every single time. The call centers worked out really well. I think that's an important thing to mention to a lot of doctors if they are looking to sign up. Being a busy GP practice, I couldn't just put this on my front office to reach out to these leads and everything. So it's been awesome where the call center reaches out to these leads,
Mhm.
decides whether they're a decent candidate or not, and then schedules from there. And then on the platform, I see all my opportunities, I see the notes that they've taken. And so that's been a huge, huge benefit for us. So like I said, overall, it's been extremely fluid and easy, process, getting signed up with you guys, getting you my information. I'll admit, to start out, I didn't give a whole lot of pictures or anything like that, because I didn't have a whole lot of material to give you guys. And the ads that you came up with were amazing. They're perfect for our area. Like I said, one of the most appealing things is that I'm from a rural town, and a lot of these patients in Maine are from rural town and know small town and love small town things. And
Mhm.
so, the first ad was, don't go to the city for, or you don't need to go to the city for this treatment. You can stay in the small town, like blah blah blah. I think you guys have been able to take the information I gave you and made it relevant for our ads, and it's worked out really well for us.
Mhm.
Right from the get go, I was kind of blown away at the amount of um, whether whether they were just the surveys that were filled out and then the leads that came from them. I just remember going on the platform after the first like few weeks and being like, wow, like this is actually working. This is probably going to work. Fast forward 11 months, and you know that revenue that we've generated is more than probably a third more than what we did last year. Like, so it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I'm so happy that we could go on this journey with you. It's been so fun. If someone was on the fence about working with us, what would you say to them?
I was on the fence for advertising, and you just said all I mean, 12.16x return on ad spend lifetime. My lowest month, we spent, or I made 4 times return on the ad spend. You might start out slow, but things are going to ramp up. I think that you guys have made a anytime that I had questions about, I think August, I mentioned to Colson, I was like, what's going on? Things have been slow. And, he was great rationalizing that with me. Told me that, other areas have certainly been a little bit slow too. Don't worry, next month, reassured and everything. And sure enough, the next month, I think I had like the most consults I'd ever had. And so anybody that's on the fence, trust your gut. I can tell you from experience, just go for it. It's
Yeah,
going to work out.
yeah, it's so awesome to see how bold and brave you've been in the start of your career to just take all this training and really jump into it when you inherited a busy practice. I mean, you could have probably just continued on and been successful, but you did take a risk and you did do invest in equipment. You did do all this extra training, and it's really wonderful to see it paying off for you.
Thank you. Yeah,
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Thank you for joining me today.